families. I'm Emily Penrod, your family relationship coach. And on this show, we address 6 areas of health for families: emotional, financial, mental, physical, social, and spiritual. This month, we've been focusing on our social well-being. And today, I have as my guest a fellow show host, Crawford Sims, and she is a marriage and family therapist, and she's also the director of a nonprofit. Karen, welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. So thank you.
Well, and I'm curious as to what led you to, I worked for a nonprofit as a teacher, but to
Oh, wonderful.
run a nonprofit, I'm impressed with that. And then also your story behind becoming a marriage and family therapist.
Okay. Always both fun. So I think for many people, particularly individuals who decide to go work in the human service industry, we have a sense of like a calling, right? And pretty young, I knew that I wanted to do something to make a difference for families and communities. So I've always had that as a part of my heart song. And I always tell people I attended my first sort of community event working with migrant farmers in Florida when I was probably in like third or fourth grade. So I really always wanted to see myself involved in some level of community transformation. However, I thought the way that I was going to do that was to be an attorney, and I went to law school for a little bit. And pretty much a year and a half into law school, I knew that I did not want to be an attorney. I did an internship at a domestic violence effort, and it was through that work. And I also did another internship at an HIV and AIDS clinic. And both of those helped me realize that I really wanted to do prevention work and not just work on the other end. And when I went home after law school and trying to figure out what my next step would be, there was this really amazing program in Indianapolis. And lots of people who I work with were like, you should check it out. Like, we think that that would be a good opportunity for you. And on a whim, I applied and got into the program, and it was such a transformative experience. And I want to say two things. One, uh, like part of what attracted me to the program was that it was really focused on, it was at a seminary, so really like, how do systems work, like how do, right, it's kind of aligned with the conversation that we're going to have here, but what do we know that makes a community whole and healthy? Lots of the people I went to school with were going to go work in congregations, and so we really did a lot of focus on that. And my day job during that time was I was working in a nonprofit working with women who were either at risk or who had been impacted by HIV disease. And I was just always fascinated with why are some people more vulnerable than not, right? And really came to learn that prevention, like there's so much that we can do in our families, in our communities, in our neighbors, with our friends to make such a meaningful, impactful difference. And that to know that study helped me realize like we all matter, and that has sort of driven the rest of my work. So families matter, communities matter, and social connections matter. So that's my short story.
I love it. It's interesting how and yet as I was listening to you talk about your journey, that time in law school was not wasted. I'm sure that some of the knowledge you gained there helped you. You got a broader training that
Oh
is
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And it
Like,
really,
I do believe no experience is wasted. Absolutely.
no,
Yeah.
no. And it gave you this rich background in helping communities, families, local communities, church communities. That's really the social well-being aspect. You covered
Yeah.
it very well.
Well, thank you.
So what did you learn that can be applied to families? What makes a healthy family from a social aspect?
Yeah. So, where do we start that conversation? Part one, I do a lot of work right now in my life around trauma. And we now know just how essential having support for families is, right? Because I think we have this idea in some ways in the US that families are this sort of mom, dad, nuclear event. And one of the things that we learned pretty early on from a family systems perspective is that it is not a structure that is significant enough to make good, healthy children and good, healthy communities. You actually need those extended networks of support. Like every family needs other families. So having aunties and cousins, and um, for those people who are connected to congregations and faith communities and neighbors. But we need all of those things to live in this village well, because it strengthens us. It provides a resiliency factor. And so, even when we think about how neighborhoods have been designed where, sometimes you're going into your garage and you never see your neighbors. Well, we've got lots of data that say if you're not coming out to sort of get to know the people you live next door to, your own sense of well-being just will diminish. So know that human beings and families need connection and community. There's this great quote that I love, and I keep attributing to someone, but I can never find where he said it. But one of my favorite quotes is, "We get sick in community, and we get well in community." And for families, that it so makes a difference. It's why like people look nostalgic at like the turn of the century, and even though that there was lots of adversity, economic adversity, depression, people recovered from those experiences much weller, and
Mhm.
were less likely to sort of end up with addictions and marriage instability. And children just developed healthier because we operated from a village mentality, and it makes such a difference in our well-being. So that's my first thing. No, if you're feeling the weight, if you're a mommy or a daddy and you are feeling the weight of parenting, and it's because you are trying to shoulder it alone, know that you are going to need other people, and making the time to connect with other people, mommies who get to know other mommies, or just healthier mommies, right? And to know that, oh, is this normal development? Are you experiencing this too? Tell me what you did when you reached this phase. I know I'm being kind of long-winded, but I work with families who are really marginalized right now. And one of the first things that we could do that has been the most transformative is we connect our families who are like in neighborhoods that are experiencing a lot of stress with families who maybe are in neighborhoods. We create play spaces from neighborhoods that are sort of more affluent, or maybe people are a little bit more college educated, and we put those families together. And those connections are the things that make it such a difference in my families who are in neighborhoods that are stressed, and even my families who typically see themselves as over resourced. When they connect together, they realize just their shared humanity, their shared stories, they share different resources and strengths, and it just sort of makes our community much more resilient. So, I'm long-winded.
I no, but you're absolutely right. I have experienced that, the isolation of parenthood. If you don't have other parents that you can talk to, or even trade off childcare, just I'll watch your kids today and you watch mine tomorrow. And the difference it makes living in a community where people care about you. And I live in a place now where I can wave to just about we don't have any through streets. So I can wave to anyone who drives by and they'll wave back. We don't even have to know each other. There's just this sense of community.
Yeah.
And it does. I think it increases your overall well-being, your physical health, your mental outlook, and everything. That's brilliant.
A little nerd science piece is when you're in a place where people know you, you feel seen and you feel safe, it reduces cortisol. So you're right. Like you'll live longer, you'll have fewer diseases, you'll feel happier. You're also more likely to do things like go for a neighborhood walk and appreciate nature and right, like all of those things that lead to overall wellness. Just having neighbors that you can borrow a cup of sugar from just makes a difference in your mental health, physically and sort of mentally.
Well, I know when my mother was elderly, we joked because she had a neighbor across the street. If my mother hadn't opened her dining room curtains by 10 a.m., her neighbor was calling to make sure she was okay.
Yeah, right? Ah, and isn't that beautiful? So, and people always think that the solutions are magical and super expensive. And sometimes it's really just knowing that there's a neighbor across the street who would notice if you didn't open up your curtains.
Yeah.
That just makes you feel like, oh, someone sees me and recognizes me.
Yes, I think that's important. And I love what you were talking about combining in one neighborhood that was high stress with another. Now, sometimes church congregations do that.
Right? Yeah. Yes. Well, I try not to be evangelical, but I feel like sometimes we've recreated systems that mirror what people used to do in congregation. So, because the
It
things that
works.
people used to do, yeah, because it worked, right? So there was a method to the madness, and it's why, individuals who are connected to those systems are healthier emotionally, psychologically, even with all of the complexities. It just makes a difference to have that kind of structural support. I was in a conversation, so we were talking about families, but I was in a conversation with a young adult yesterday who is really struggling with young adulthood. And we've got lots of data that says that. But in part, one of the things that she's yearning for is mentorship. And so she's like, where are those places where I just meet people who have a little bit more lived experience, who can help me understand like how to navigate this career space or this professional space. And she's coming from a generational place where people in her family didn't navigate, so they don't have those kind of resources. And so we've kind of made a list of all of the places and communities where you could find mentors, right? Congregations, some professional organizations, meetups, but to look for those things. And she was like, oh, I forget. This is why maybe my grandma was always involved in a faith-based community, is because it kind of built in some of those systems of support that we need as we try to navigate life. So that's my big pitch for join a community. So, right, know your neighbors, know that you need support, get connected to community. So those are some of my like little nuggets of hope.
And that mentorship, and it would not only benefit a young adult, but think of the older person maybe living alone, what it would mean to them to have a young person come and visit them.
Right. Oh yeah. 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 And that, as I kind of have reached the mid 50s, I am constantly thinking about generativity. Like, how do I make sure, like, I've had this sort of lived experience. How do I make sure that what I've learned, maybe I make it easier for other people? I love working with families that way, where I can say, like, hey, that's completely normal. Or,
Mhm.
oh, this is maybe something that would require a little bit of support or some additional help. Or, gosh, I wished I had asked that question when, when this was happening in my family. And so it also, you're right, what we get back from that sense of generosity and generativity, where we connect back and we get a chance to share our expertise, because frequently our kids do not want us to be experts in their lives.
Mm, I remember reading the history of colonial America and reading that it was generally accepted that when your children became teenagers, they wouldn't listen to you anymore. And so that was the age they would apprentice their children out to another family. And they would learn a trade, a skill that would provide a living, but they would move and live with another family to do that. I just thought that was interesting.
So fascinating. And it makes so much sense, right? Because at the time where most development, where people are like, my kids are making me crazy, my adolescents,
Yeah,
knowing that they're going to be listening and responding and learning a skill and trying something new, expanding their brains, but in someone else's household. What a
you
gift,
know,
right?
and someone who, with shared values.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. That boy, some things that we used to do really worked.
And I would change that famous quote about the village to say it takes a village to support parents so parents can raise their children. We have children because we want to raise them, but I totally agree with you. Families should not be isolated. They really need community.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're on the same page in a community that is you use this word like loving and caring and not condemning. So
Yeah.
and where we're not doing the parent Olympics where are you raising your kid well enough or good enough and we're doing the comparison and the pressure because we're all doing the best we can and we need people who can reflect back to us loving and caring eyes.
Yes. Oh, I totally agree. I'm also familiar with a study that was done comparing what is the best environment for a child. And, being raised by their parents, of course, is the best. But if the parents are struggling, if they're not able to care for their child, extended family is a workable solution, or even, a community. But it
Yeah.
was determined that institutionalizing, which I remember it used to be, we had these orphanages, these institutions, children were sent there, and they said that is probably the most damaging
Yeah.
environment.
Because we're made for connection and
Yes.
community and we need consistency and predictability. And I will also say I know for me I was fortunate enough my daughter's grandma came to live with us for a while, so she did most of the early caregiving and continued to stay that in that relationship. And what made such a difference, and I will say both her grandma and her nana both were spectacular about this. So we were gifted. Her dad and I, wanted to raise this very, I was in graduate school and he was in law school. So we were going to do perfect parenting, whatever that means. But we were gifted with a very strong willed child whose personality was very different than either his personality and my personality.
Oh, wow.
Fortunately, she was very imaginative, very creative. Um, this is the joke, so you'll appreciate this. My her dad wanted her to sort of not be bound by like classical gender stereotypes. He wanted like her to play with as many trucks, as many dolls, and she came out, and I swear she was so strong-willed. She would only wear like Disney pinafores, like she thought she was a Disney princess. So she'd be walking around with like little Disney heels and the little nightgowns, and her dad would be like pajamas, and then there would be like this power struggle around. She is not going to wear the pajamas, she is not wearing the pants, she'll put the leggings on under her dress, but she sees herself as a Disney princess. And fortunately she had grandparents who would play tea party dress up with her for hours. And my mom laughs because I didn't even watch cartoons until I had her. So I was always like very serious reader kid. And she was, let's create villages and let's build things. And we were so fortunate to have grandparents who would see her and validate and pour into her. And although I think we were good enough parents,
Oh, yeah.
we just couldn't, our style and her style didn't match. But having grandparents, and she had a nana who loved her and who bought a nana van and would take her to these amazing like summer trips. They went to see Niagara Falls and they went on a Disney cruise, and so she knew that she would get like these 6 weeks with her nana doing very creative. Her grandfather was an artist, so they would do painting, crafting, and creativity. who just sort of fed into the child that she was designed to be. So she wasn't like what we were, but who she was, and grandparents made that difference.
Ooh, I love that. Yes. I really don't think it's possible for a child to have too many caring adults involved in their life. That's not possible. And you mentioned something that we've moved away from, and that's several generations living either in the same house or at least in the same neighborhood.
Oh,
And quite
absolutely.
often, children are growing up distant from their grandparents.
Yeah, and I know it was definitely magnified during COVID, but
Yeah.
nothing makes a difference than really that, time where you're around those reflective mirrors where people see you and appreciate you and validate you, and you're like, "Oh, that's why I do that quirky thing." Because it is just wonderful to have people who feel good. And again, I know we're having this sort of romanticized view of families. I also think, you were asking questions around resources, but families also teach us how to problem solve. And especially if our families are healthy, right? They help us have those, you know, challenging conversations to, think about complex ideas, sometimes in love, push back and say, think about that a little bit deeper or a little bit harder. So it is not just all airy fairy, but I think it is right in those loving, supportive relationships that we hear people who have those tough conversations. I remember speaking of, I remember when my daughter got to the place where she was that, 20 something kind of self-oriented phase. And it was her grandparents who said, hey, knowing when you are not thinking about the larger family and the impact of your decisions on families, it kind of like it's hurtful. But they could only have that conversation because they had built those connections as it was going. And it was just so loving that she could kind of reflect and think about, oh, yeah, my actions do impact other people. So families can be that kind of gift for you.
That, yes, so much more than just a safety net, but a safe place to grow, to express yourself, but also to add a little more perspective. And I think we all need that. Sometimes we need another person who's going to keep us from taking ourselves too seriously or
Yes.
allow us to get a broader view.
Yeah. Especially because sometimes your friends can get, they sometimes only look and feel like so your family sometimes is very, very diverse, and that allows you that appreciation for the, network of diversity.
Yeah, yeah. And the different perspectives of the different generations, as you mentioned, and that key of building that rapport from day one.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. So
I
another
love
little
it.
tip, right? Talk, talk, talk. Don't I know we're in a time where people uh, we'll talk a lot about boundaries, and we'll do a lot of cutoffs. And
That
I can
concerns me.
imagine there's a small percentage of maybe relationships that are incredibly toxic, but I think sometimes people make cutoffs where it's just strong disagreements, and there isn't a need to cut
Yeah,
off those relationships. It is actually like, how do you learn? I will tell people all the time, I remember kind of reaching a point in my development where my mom and I will talk about this. I'll be like, I know who you are. I know who you are. I know your heart is in the right place. And the fact that I am constantly like annoyed or upset because you are your own person, that's on like me, right? Like that is not about you. That is my underdevelopment because I see you, right? And just like I want you to see and appreciate me, I also need to give you space to be you. And that's part of like those evolving adult relationships. But there's just a piece where it's like we could stay in relationships and we don't have to agree all the time. And, the fact that you're always going to make a comment about my hair doesn't mean that you're critiquing, you know what I mean? It's just the nature of who you are and how you grew up and cultural values. And it's just like there's a piece where I can just sort of be with you with an appreciation and lots of grace.
I think that is so precious. Like you, I think anytime parents decide we're going to cut off contact with my parents, and like you said, sometimes there are toxic relationships. The grandparents would actually be dangerous, but evaluate that carefully. You're denying your children access to their heritage.
Yeah.
And just like you said, give grace, just accept that, just like our children are not like us, our parents are not exactly, and just accept the differences and work together to support each other. I think
Yeah.
that's what family is about.
Yeah. 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 And just imagine how different our communities and neighborhoods would be if we learned those skills at home.
Oh, what a difference it would make. What a difference it would make if we had strong family units that learned this and taught it to their children. It would be huge.
It'd be
I
huge. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So Karen, I know you also have a show on Win Win Women. Tell us about it.
So at that show, I do my best. So it's do, be, and live better. So please, please, please. But I really kind of use that space to talk about trauma more specifically,
Uh-huh.
and sort of resiliency. So, like, what it takes to sort of be well. And there's this buzzword called trauma informed care, because we can do things really, really well. But if we're not doing them in ways that are like healing centered, and like we're not looking at, like, again, how we structure our organizations, our programs, our conversations to be, does, align with what we know about how the brain works and what makes people feel connected. So that's the nature of my show. It's good for coaches and also people who work in organizations and businesses. So we try to think through all of that, and I also try to infuse with all the other geeky people, a lot of the science around why we know things that work. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, well, and you know, I think there, I don't know that there are very many people who don't experience trauma at some time in their
Mhm.
life. I think we need to be very aware of it. I know I received some training as a school teacher.
Yeah.
So, but if they want to learn more about you, what's the best way for them to contact you?
So definitely, you can find me on Win Win Network, and then I run a nonprofit that you mentioned. It's called the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, and you can always go to my website and check out Try. We actually have a few like resources, like how to do deep breathing and how to do some mindfulness. So if you're having a stressful day, and we have a very, very, very active like social media presence. So with there, like good activities around how to reduce your stress and how to calm down. So because we think, on those days where you're an amazing parent, you got support, but you got frustrated at the grocery store and you just sort of need to sort of get recentered, knowing how to breathe in the car or get yourself regrounded can make a difference in, do you turn around and yell at your kiddo, or do you stay centered and do something loving and kind for yourself? And so we want to reduce and prevent trauma, not just clean it up once it happens.
I love that. What a valuable resource. And they can get that from your website.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Karen. You have shared some valuable information. I appreciate that. And I love talking to you. So
It
thank
was
you.
such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. And, I wish you well and appreciate your expertise. And, working and coaching families is such meaningful work because it's, strength based and loving and kind, and it sort of supports people in their evolution and journey. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Well, I'm happy to do it. Good to be part of Win Win Women.
Yes.
So for my viewers, check out Karen's show. It's on our Win Win Women channel. And join us again next week at the same time. Until then, love yourself, love your family. Let's make the world a better place by strengthening families. This is Emmylou Penrod with HealingYourFamilies.com.